In the harsh winter of 1932, a quiet storm settled over the hills of Savoy, blanketing everything in a silken shroud of snow. Amid this desolate beauty stood the Château de Lune, a pale, lonely mansion that had been empty for decades. Villagers spoke of curses and ghosts, and few dared to climb the hill to its gates. But one December evening, a faint light appeared in its highest window. The caretaker, an old man named Émile, had returned. He'd received a letter from a Parisian solicitor, sealed with the crescent moon and rose of the de Lune family. It requested he prepare the west wing for a guest. The handwriting looked like that of Lucien de Lune, the young heir who vanished in the Great War 30 years ago. That night, as the storm raged, the great bell at the gate tolled. Émile, his hands trembling, opened the heavy oak door. There stood a young woman, cloaked in fur, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She introduced herself as Isabelle Laurent, a pianist from Paris. She'd come a long way, she said, and was told to expect lodging. When Émile asked by whom, she answered softly, "By Monsieur Lucien de Lune." She produced a letter, its seal gleaming in the lantern light. It was the same crescent and rose. Émile led her inside. The chateau was a world of dust and shadows, its walls lined with portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow them. Isabelle paused before one. A young man in military dress with dark hair and pale blue eyes. The plaque read, Lucien de Lune, 1888-1915. A chill ran through her. "Émile," she whispered, "is he?" "Gone, mademoiselle," the old man replied. "Since the Great War." "Then who wrote to me?" she asked. Émile could only say, "I do not know, but it was his name, his hand." That night Isabelle couldn't sleep. The house felt like it was holding its breath. Drawn by an unseen force, she went down to the grand salon. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows, illuminating a piano covered in dust. She lifted the lid, brushed the keys, and began to play a soft, sorrowful Chopin nocturne. The music filled the hall, echoing against the cold stone. As she played, she felt a presence, a shift in the air, the faint warmth of breath upon her neck. She turned. No one was there. But when she looked at the piano, she saw, just for an instant, a man's reflection beside hers. A pale face with sad eyes she recognized from the portrait. She gasped, and the reflection vanished. But a faint scent of cedarwood and smoke lingered in the air. The next morning, Émile warned her, "You must not linger in the salon after midnight. There are things in this house that remember too much. The de Lune grief is strong. It has a way of staying." Later, exploring the library, Isabelle found a leather-bound journal with Lucien's crest. Inside were sketches of the chateau and of a woman with dark hair at a piano. Beneath them, poetry written in the same hand as her letter, "In winter's quiet, the heart remembers what the body forgets. I wait among the snow and stars where music once lived." A pressed, fragile rose fell from its pages. Each evening she played again, and each time she felt his presence. A soft sigh in the stillness, a warmth that answered her music. She saw his reflection in mirrors, his face beside hers, smiling with an unbearable sadness. She began to dream of him, walking the moonlit halls, whispering her name. In her dreams he always said the same words before vanishing into the frost, "Do not leave me when the thaw comes." On the 7th night, she awoke to find her window open, the moonlight pouring in. On the sill lay a single, fresh red rose, glistening with dew. Outside, the deep, untouched snow showed no footprints at all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more tales from the shadows. See you next time. The days at Château de Lune passed in a slow, frozen haze. The snow never melted, it only deepened, as if the sky had forgotten the sun. From my window, I watched the white fields stretch endlessly toward the forest, where bare trees stood like black spires. The world was utterly silent. Inside, time moved differently. The clocks ticked faintly, and the air smelled of dust and old perfume. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps behind me in the halls, but whenever I turned there was only stillness. Emile, the old caretaker, spent his hours in the kitchen or stoking the furnaces below. I rarely saw him, and when I did, his eyes were shadowed with worry. On the fourth morning, a letter appeared under my door. The envelope bore no name, only the de Lune crest pressed into the wax. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Mademoiselle Laurent, your music stirs the walls as it once stirred hearts. The house remembers you. Tonight, when the moon is full, play again in the West Salon. The portrait wishes to wake. It was signed L de L. The handwriting was identical to the letter that summoned me here, but it looked freshly written. A strange calm settled over me. Half fear, half an ache I couldn't name. That night, I obeyed. The moon rose, pale and full, pouring silver light into the salon. I lit no candles. I sat at the piano, my reflection a faint shimmer on its lacquered surface. As my fingers touched the keys, a sigh seemed to move through the house. I began to play Clair de Lune. The melody drifted through the silence, lonely as memory. My gaze lifted to the far end of the room, where an immense painting hung veiled beneath a dusty curtain. Emile had told me this was the favorite room of Baroness Geneviève, and that the portrait was hers. When the piece ended, I stood, candle in hand, and approached the painting. The air felt heavy. I hesitated, then pulled the curtain aside. The candlelight trembled. It wasn't the Baroness, it was him. Lucien de Lune. Younger, his gray-blue eyes watching me with startling intensity. His hand rested on a piano and a date was inscribed, 1901. But it was his expression that made my heart race, as if he were listening to someone just beyond the frame. Suddenly, I noticed fresh scratches in the marble floor, as though the frame had been moved. I reached out. The edge of the canvas was still warm. I gasped and turned, but the salon was empty. "Lucien," I whispered, "if this is your doing, speak to me." Only my echo answered. The next morning, I found Emile in the corridor. "Who moved the portrait in the West Salon?" I asked. He stopped. "No one touches that painting, mademoiselle." I showed him the letter. The color drained from his face. No one could have written this. It is his hand. But he has been gone these 20 years. His voice dropped. "If you value your soul, burn that letter, and do not play for him again." But I couldn't obey. His loneliness matched my own. In Paris, I'd played for indifferent faces. Here, at least, someone listened. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I returned to the salon, guided by moonlight, and there on the piano lay a single red rose, perfect, though the gardens were buried in snow. I touched its cold petals. Then I heard it, a soft voice, low and distant. "Isabelle." I turned. Lucien de Lune stood in the doorway, pale and translucent, moonlight passing through him like mist, but his eyes were alive with sorrow and longing. "You're real," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "If remembering is real, then yes." I took a step forward. "Why are you here?" "To hear you play," he said, "and to finish what began long ago." He explained he'd brought me here to play a sonata for his mother, one he never got to play before she died. "When the snow falls," he said softly, "the veil grows thin. And when the snow melts," a shadow crossed his face, "then I must sleep again." He moved closer, his presence a comfort I had longed for. "Play for me," he murmured. I sat at the piano and began the Sonata Pathétique. As the music swelled, the room seemed to breathe. For a fleeting moment I felt his cool, weightless hand on mine. When the final note faded, he was gone. Days turned to weeks, and the storm never ceased. I spoke often to Lucien, though he rarely appeared. My affection for him deepened. It was foolish, impossible, but love has always been the most impossible of things. Emile noticed my growing pallor. "This house is taking you," he said. Or giving me back what I lost, I replied. Myself. That night I returned to the portrait. But something had changed. Lucien's painted eyes were now fixed upon me, filled with desperation. Lucien, I whispered, what are you trying to tell me? A whisper came from behind the frame. Free me. How? Find the key, the voice murmured. In the garden, beneath the sundial where the moon touches at midnight. Before dawn I ventured into the knee-deep snow. I found the sundial and brushed away the snow. My fingers struck a small iron box. Inside lay a single key. When I returned to the chateau, I saw it for the first time. A small lock hidden in the corner of the portrait's frame. I inserted the key. The lock clicked. The canvas trembled. The painted Lucian smiled, and then, slowly, his hand reached out of the frame. The candlelight flared. I gasped, but didn't step back. He looked at me, his eyes burning with longing. Now, he said softly, we can begin. For weeks, the snow had lain heavy upon the land, as though the world itself had been frozen in some timeless sleep. But on the eve of March, a strange warmth stirred in the air. The icicles clinging to the chateau's arches began to weep. The thaw had begun. And with it, a quiet dread stirred in Isabel's heart. The mornings grew brighter, but the house seemed to sink deeper into sorrow. Lucien had not appeared in 3 days. Each night she waited by the piano, playing softly under the moonlight, hoping he would step once more from the shadows. But only the hollow echo of her music answered her. Emile, the old caretaker, had grown more withdrawn, moving through the house like a ghost of his own. When Isabel pressed him about Lucien, he only shook his head. The veil is closing, he murmured. When the thaw comes, the dead must sleep. You must leave before it takes you too. But she could not. The chateau had become her entire world, its silence her companion, its ghost her purpose. That evening, she sat once more in the west salon. The portrait of Lucien still hung open, the faint trace of the keyhole gleaming like a secret scar. The room smelled of roses again, and though the fireplace lay dead, the air seemed alive with a warmth born of remembrance. Lucien, she whispered, where have you gone? A soft, weary voice answered from nearby. Nowhere you cannot follow. She turned sharply. He stood before her, half shadow, half light, his form flickering like a candle flame. Her eyes filled with tears. I thought you were gone. I linger only because you call to me, he said gently. But my time grows thin. The thaw comes, Isabel. You must let me rest. I can't. She rose, reaching toward him. You asked me to free you. He smiled faintly, the sorrow in his gaze almost unbearable. I asked to be remembered, not kept. The snow outside slid from the rooftops with a sigh. Isabel felt a pain like parting, sharp and sweet. What will happen if I don't let you go? She whispered. Lucien stepped closer, his form wavering. Then you will join me, and the house will keep us both. She looked at him, truly looked at him. He was no longer flesh, but pure, fleeting memory. And yet she loved him with a love as real as any heartbeat. He reached for her hand. For a moment their fingers met, cold against warm, death against life. Play for me, he said softly. Once more. Then let me go. She nodded, her heart breaking. She sat at the piano and began to play the melody from his journal, the one he promised his mother before the war took him. As she played, the moonlight thickened into mist, and the portrait behind her began to glow. Lucien's voice joined the music. I was 19 when I left for the front, he said. I promised to return by spring. I thought the thaw would bring me home. But the thaw came, and I never returned. Only my memory did. Bound to this place, to this song, to the promise I failed to keep. Tears blurred Isabel's vision as the music slowed. You have kept it for me, he whispered. And now, it is time. The final notes fell into silence. She turned. Lucien stood before the portrait, his face no longer pale, his eyes alive with peace. "Will I see you again?" she asked. He smiled. "When the snow falls once more." He leaned close, his lips brushing her forehead like the memory of a kiss. And as the first light of dawn touched the windows, he faded, dissolving into the air like breath on glass. The portrait behind him changed. Where once a young man stood alone, there were now two figures, Lucien and Isabelle, painted together. Emile found her there that morning, asleep before the piano. "Mademoiselle," he whispered, "it is over. The thaw has come." She woke slowly. "He's gone," she murmured. Emile followed her gaze to the portrait and froze. From that day, the West Salon was never cold again. When spring came, Isabelle left the chateau. She returned to Paris, but something of her stayed behind. She no longer played for applause, only for memory. Each winter she would return to the Château de Lune and play. And each time she felt a hand upon hers, cool, gentle, and eternal. On her final visit, many years later, she found the house empty and dusty. Yet the West Salon remained untouched. She sat, trembling, and played one last time. When the song ended, she smiled. "Until the next snow," she said softly. Outside, as night fell, the first flakes began to descend, and in the portrait above the hearth, the two figures seemed to move ever so slightly closer, as if the distance between them had finally vanished. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales that linger long after they're told.